This conference is being recorded, so we'll be available to view later, and we'll send you a link to the webinar so that you can share it with your colleagues, as well as the presentation deck. Thank you very much for participating today. As you know, we've picked a very timely topic, cyber threats and crown jewels. We're going to talk today about critical business information, trade secrets, and the best ways to protect these important corporate assets. Again, welcome. This is Pamela Passman, and I'm joined by my colleague, Alan Dixon. We're going to provide some background on the issue and then provide some ways for you to think about how you can help protect the critical business information of your company. I wanted just to start off in putting this issue into context and discuss the challenges that companies around the world see with this issue. And I think some of the statistics that we're sharing on the slide from 2 reports from PricewaterhouseCoopers give you a sense of the extent of the problem and the magnitude of the problem. One of the big challenges is that the issue of breaches to companies goes undetected for some time, for many, many months by companies. So you have been breached, yet you are not yet aware that there are potentially third parties accessing your network, accessing your computers. The financial impact on companies is quite significant, and we see growing quite significantly over time. Only about half the companies surveyed in the Pricewaterhouse Global State of Information Security Survey have identified how to protect their sensitive assets, have put in place a program to do that. And less than half, or a little bit more than half, actually have inventory to understand what are their most sensitive data. And overall, 70% express concern about their ability to protect their intellectual property or their confidential customer data. This, as you know, has become a very significant issue for the C-suite, for the senior leadership of companies, but it also increasingly has become a very significant issue for members of boards of directors. We see this in the United States and Europe, and increasingly in other countries, where the issue of cyber threats, the issue of protecting critical information, privacy issues are really the 1 and 2 or 3 of the top 5 issues that boards are concerned with. And just a few data points for Brazil. These issues are growing issues in Brazil. The costs, of course, are also growing. As we'll discuss later, the greatest threat comes from what we call insiders, from employees and contractors and trusted third parties. The industries that are most impacted: services, technology, and the public sector. The root causes of data breach, as we'll see as we talk more broadly, more globally about the issue. Malicious or criminal attacks are about 1/3, where you're sort of a network error or systems glitch about 1/3, and human error. We talk about the insider threat, meaning employees and other contractors and suppliers, distributors, individuals that have access to your network because you provided them access, but there's malicious behavior involved. But a huge part of the challenge is just human error, is just employees that are not being careful about how they're managing access to their computer, access to the corporate network. We wanted just to talk briefly about the Sony case, because it really was an inflection point for many, many companies when they witnessed the rolling release of information that was taken from Sony, and the really broad applicability that the issue had to almost every employee at Sony. So much email was disclosed, so much information about the company's plans, its relationships with talent in the industry, its negotiation strategies, and of course, its raw intellectual property, its films and scripts. This was a situation where almost every Sony employee felt exposed. It wasn't just the individuals in the human resources department that had information about employees, or those that managed customer information or customer credit cards, or information about the company's finances. It was all different kinds of corporate information. And it was not just information that was disclosed publicly. Some of the information was actually destroyed so that Sony no longer had access to it. Sony had to delay the release of its financial statements because important financial data was destroyed. We see a figure that is very compelling, and that is that 75% of most organizations' value and sources of revenue creation are from intangible assets, from intellectual property, from competitive information, business critical information. And I think the Sony example gives you a sense of just really how broad this is. You know, the different kinds of information that is critical to a company that potentially could be released by accessing an employee's computer or the corporate network. We also see that the impact of the Sony breach was quite significant on a number of different levels. Certainly the loss of information and disclosure of information that the company had no intention of being disclosed, information about negotiation strategy, information about salaries internal to the company, information about how much different producers, actors were being paid. That has really impacted Sony's ability to engage with people in the industry. We saw that the reputation of Sony, its relationships with key people, the impact on its employees. There have been some lawsuits initiated by Sony employees because of the release of personal information. And in many ways, Sony was not able to use its network for several days and impact the company's ability to operate. Separate networks had to be created so that some business could be conducted. And I think we're still seeing, and will for some time see, the financial impact and the legal implications as Sony has to navigate litigation that has been initiated in the United States. So, we're going to provide opportunity for you to ask questions through the chat capability online. So you can please, if you have questions, begin to send them to us, and we can certainly pause and answer them, or we can wait to the end. But if you have a question, please do type it into the chat section on your screen, and we'd be very pleased to answer it. I want to talk a little bit about the threats that companies are facing and why this situation has become so significant and so widespread. And fundamentally, we're working in a globalized marketplace where your customers, your business partners, your employees are spread around the world. They're no longer in the same city, in the same country. The use of the network has provided access to people beyond any sense of a border. And so we have this globalized marketplace where we have the opportunity to buy and sell and hire and engage with people all over the world, and the reliance, of course, on the internet to do that. We see that companies have supply chains or value chains that are also distributed around the world. In an environment where it's highly, highly competitive, where companies are competing not just with companies in their own country, but around the world. We have a very mobile workforce, not just in terms of using devices connected to networks, multiple devices connected to networks, but in some countries we see employees moving companies and changing jobs at a much faster rate than in the past. Certainly the recovery of the economy has impacted that, but a very mobile workforce in terms of changing jobs as well. And of course, the digitization of so much information available to individuals. And we see that at companies, in most cases, that information is broadly available to their employee base, and with few limitations. And we'll talk about that more. But all of these factors have led to an environment where there's lots of information available to different layers in a corporate relationship, with people moving in and out of the corporation in a highly competitive environment. We're going to talk about the importance of companies understanding their cyber risk landscape, and we just wanted to give you a sense of what we mean by that. And that includes understanding the threat actors that may be interested in your corporate information. We've outlined, 5 threat actors. You read a lot about it. You read a lot in the newspaper about nation states. This in reality represents a small percentage of the breaches, the threat attacks, but yet these are very sophisticated players that are trying to obtain information from companies, from other governments, from other organizations for a variety of reasons, and ones that continue to do it for specific, very targeted kinds of information. I mentioned the malicious insider, your employees, your contractors, your business partners, that for a variety of reasons want to do something to either gain financial opportunity or to in some way harm the institution, harm the company. Your competitors, as I mentioned, are no longer in the same city or country, and for competitive advantage, have ways to access your information. Often they do it by recruiting one of your insiders, or working in conjunction with a nation state, or just as a sophisticated cyber player. Organized crime, transnational crime is also involved, where there's money and opportunity. We always see organized crime, and hacktivists that want to expose your company for a variety of social and political reasons, or want to expose some information from your company. The methods that we've outlined are a whole array of sophisticated and not so sophisticated ways that your information can be accessed through your network, through individual computers. Malware is something that companies are struggling with, where you get an email that looks like it's from somebody in the company or somebody you're asked to click a link, and that releases the malware into the computer and then often into the network, and is used then to remotely access that computer. Lots of different ways that sophisticated and not so sophisticated individuals are accessing your network. And we're going to talk a lot about how to be sure that your processes, your people, and your technology are working to be able to best protect you and your company. And these are where the vulnerabilities are, where you don't have processes in place to dictate how to organize how your people are using your network, are using your information. And your technology may only be protecting your perimeter of your network, but not protecting the actual information or IP that sits inside of the network. This is just a little bit more information about malicious insiders. Again, all the research indicates that the vast majority of breaches involve a malicious insider. We're going to talk a little bit more about the importance of training and educating your employees so that they can identify situations where someone inside the company may be accessing information that they shouldn't access, may be taking information out of the company. We find that employees are most susceptible to this kind of behavior when there's a change in the business, whether there's a sale of part of the company, a merger, some financial challenges that the company is having. Right before an employee may be separating from the company, whether they're separating on their own terms or there is a reduction in forces or some sort of termination. But what we're finding is that companies are now much more aware that they've got to track the access to their network by their employees, and in particular during different kinds of challenges that the company may face. We see increasingly the importance of the exit interview. More and more companies are conducting exit interviews so that some person in the human resources department or some other manager in the company is talking to employees as they leave the company and understanding the terms upon which they're leaving and reminding them of the importance of not taking any corporate information with them. And also just wanted to highlight the threat of supply chain or vendor or third parties that have access to your network. You may be familiar with the Target breach that happened last year, a very significant retailer in the United States. And that breach was conducted via a vendor, an air conditioning heating vendor that provide air conditioning and heating services to Target. That company had access to the Target network simply to send Target invoices on a monthly basis. And that was used, that company's credentials were compromised to gain access to Target's network. And so as cyber thieves become much more sophisticated, they really look for the weakest link. And so often, while we read about some very large, sophisticated companies being breached, their access by their key third parties, which are often smaller or mid-sized companies. So now we're going to move to our recommendations, Create's recommendations on managing and securing corporate digital assets. And we've had the opportunity to work with companies around the world and get a sense of how they're doing it and different strategies to better protect corporate assets. I'm going to pause just one moment and read a question that came through about exit interviews. I've been asked to further elaborate on exit interviews. Is it recommended to have the employee or contractor sign some sort of release or document in which they are aware that any misuse or misappropriation of employees' confidential information could lead to sanctions or lawsuits? Great question. And certainly an important part of the process is when employees are first hired, that they sign an employment agreement that includes different provisions about them respecting intellectual property and trade secrets, confidential information, abiding by the company's policies on these issues, and even in that agreement, reiterating that when they leave the company, they may not take any confidential or proprietary information with them. In some countries, it's required by law that you have an agreement as they leave the company that they have not taken any confidential or proprietary information with them. But certainly the employment agreement up front, you can, depending on the local legal environment, have them sign a second agreement as they leave. and the importance of reminding them as they leave the company of their responsibility and obligation not to take any confidential information with them. And as they enter the company, to remind them that they should not be bringing into your company the confidential or proprietary information of their prior employer. So I'm going to hand it over to Alan. But again, please, if you have any questions, please type them into the chat section of your screen. Thank you.
Good morning. This is Alan Dixon. Is this clear enough, Pamela?
Yes, you sound great. Thank you.
Okay. So I think Pamela's really highlighted, how much of a problem this whole area of cybersecurity is for companies all over the world. The kinds of harm, the kinds of issues that come up, and I think, I think there's a lot of money and a lot of time being spent at the moment, kind of reactively, and that is, companies that have had a cyber breach, are spending a lot of time with their IT department trying to get all the firewalls and all the, passwords and things sorted out. And for those in the legal department, the usual response is, well, let's check the agreements, let's, get some new things signed. But one of the things that we're seeing and talking with a number of companies all over the world is that this isn't just an IT or a contract issue. The issue of protecting your corporate assets, your confidential information, your trade secrets, these things that give a company value that goes far beyond the value of their real estate and their physical inventory, is an aspect that's dealt with in almost every area of a company. Many employees have access to confidential information of different kinds. Your suppliers, other business partners you deal with, often have access to confidential information, or at least to your networks. There are places in your manufacturing, places in your human resources where these things come up, as Pamela was saying. So really the question is, how do you manage this in a way that actually gets to the core of the problem and doesn't just, hope that the IT department is going to fix it for us? And what we've been talking about as Create and talking with a number of companies is about really a management system approach where there's a real risk management going on that assesses what the problem is, what the potential problems are, as Pamela was saying, and how this can be managed in a way in all the areas of a company where issues of confidential information, potential cybersecurity breaches may come up. And the advantage of having this kind of integrated view, this holistic view, as you see here really, is that it's not just a few of us inside the company that are thinking about these things, but it's an awareness that comes up all through the company, that employees know what they're supposed to be doing, there's expectations that are clearly communicated. Hopefully this helps to manage and protect against problems happening before they happen and not just after they happen. And this is the kind of risk management that's going on, obviously, in other areas in a lot of companies. Things that you're doing about quality control, for example, or things you're doing about dealing with various kinds of legal compliance. This is very much an issue that can be managed in the same way of risk management through management systems that apply throughout the company as these other kinds of issues that many companies already deal with. So the three steps really to thinking about this from a high level are first identifying what the risks are. Again, very standard in enterprise risk management in other areas. But now as we get into cybersecurity, if you look at some of the international standards, for example, the ISO 27001 IT standard, which deals with information security in computer networks, is very much built on this idea of enterprise risk management to identify, assess, and then manage the risks. And what this amounts to at the high level for companies that are trying to protect their confidential information against cyber theft is one, identifying what it is exactly they're trying to protect. Interestingly, if you ask some companies, so what's your most valuable information? What do you need to protect as far as confidential information, trade secrets? Oftentimes companies don't have a clear idea, and certainly when you get down to the department level. Hello? Certainly when you get down to the department level of people actually managing and dealing with information, they may not know what kind of confidential information they're meant to be protecting. Is this confidential information? What do I do with it? How do I deal with third parties about this? So really identifying what confidential information you have and what the risks to that information are hugely important to understand before you start. Second step assessment, and that is, okay, so where are the major risks? What's the likelihood of these risks happening? And what's the cost to the company, the other organization, if these things really go wrong and there's a cyber breach? So again, this is just prioritizing. There's an unlimited amount of things you could do, obviously, to protect your confidential information from cyber breach. But having a good idea of what you're trying to protect and where the biggest risks are likely to come from and how bad they're going to be if they actually happen is a really good way to help prioritize and spend your time and money well protecting your trade secrets. And then third, obviously, what specific steps need to be done in order to manage those kind of risks. Create has done a study with PricewaterhouseCoopers on trade secrets where we've taken a look at many of the issues we're talking about here, some of the ones Pamela's described already about the economic impacts and who's engaged in this kind of activity. But they've also come up with a really useful framework, we think. We have come up with a useful framework together for dealing with managing trade secrets within a company. And the objective really is to build consensus across different business units, as I said, prioritize and rank your list of trade secrets and other confidential information, having a process that's predictable, that's people know what to do, to take a serious look at the money aspects of this, where are the biggest money and other damage risks to the company, and really putting this information together and figuring out then, okay, what exactly do we have to do across all the relevant areas of the company? So this is really the 5 steps of the PwC and Create report, which is obviously identify your trade secrets, assess the threat actors along the lines that Pamela was talking about. Are you likely to have a competitor trying to get your information? Are you likely to have another country trying to steal your information? Are you likely to have a problem with your employees just not knowing what to do and being not very careful about your information? So where's the risk likely to come from? What is the likely cost of damage and the cost of those trade secrets and other information? And then on the basis of that, securing your portfolio with practical steps. Now, Create has spent quite a bit of time, and we have been developing actually a service for leading practices of trade secrets in looking at all the areas where steps can and should be taken to improve cybersecurity, to evaluate risks, and to do really practical steps to protect your information. I see we have actually Mark Chaplin has asked, do you consider crown jewels to be information that only has a confidentiality requirement? Or do you consider information with integrity and availability requirements as possible candidates. Obviously, Mark, all of these kinds of information can have value to the company. And there's other kinds of intangible information that's not confidential that has value to the company. What we're really focusing on here is confidential information that has value because it's confidential. The things that Pamela was mentioning, the trade secrets of Sony, for example, the pre-released information, the emails between executives and talent, the financial information of the company, the processes and the sort of know-how of a company. All these kinds of things. If it's not confidential information, then the risks to that information are the same, whether you're hacked or not. It's these confidential bits that you need to keep confidential that really cybersecurity is trying to protect, because that's what people are trying to get when they get into your systems. That's the kind of information that competitors want to buy from your employees. So it's this confidential information that we're really looking at here. So I want to spend a few minutes on this slide because this is really the practical steps. I mean, once you understand what confidential information really has value to you and where your risks are, what's going to be the biggest problems if that information gets stolen or misused. So there's really 8 areas where this kind of information is likely to come up, where there's likely to be issues within a company, and they're the ones that you'll see on these slides here if you can see this at this point. The first is policies, procedures, and records. So, really the company's policies, the company's overall rules that it applies to all employees, to all third parties. What are your policies on trade secrets are a really important way to start, because it both sets your requirements, what are the rules, but it also starts to disseminate the information to employees, to third parties, of what you expect in these areas. And Create has actually developed a set of model policies that companies can use for protecting this kind of information. Procedures are really the detailed steps that one takes when an issue comes up. For example, a lot of companies have a marking procedure. We stamp all of our confidential information confidential, and employees should know if it's stamped that way, they shouldn't be giving it to third parties and things like that. Pamela, someone here was asking about exit interviews. So there's a whole range of things, for example, policies and procedures that HR departments would want to think about in this area. So exit interview is one of them. Things like, what does an employee do with his or her computer when he leaves the company? What kind of access is terminated when an employee leaves? All kinds of issues of returning goods, signing contracts. What about the employee's own personal devices? If they have a mobile phone or their own PC or a Twitter account or something else, what happens in that area? What does the company expect when a company employee leaves? Are those things checked and this kind of thing? So there's lots of kinds of procedures, not just employees, but third parties. How do you deal with your suppliers? If somebody needs to disclose confidential information, how does that work? Who needs to approve it? So there's a range of procedures that are really important. And obviously records like contracts with employees, contracts with suppliers, standard non-disclosure agreements that you use. There's a whole range of records to be, that need to be right in order for this stuff to be enforceable. The second area really is IP compliance team or information protection team, one might say, and that is who's in charge of this responsibility in your company. And again, because this usually sort of transcends from legal to IT to HR to manufacturing to compliance to supply chain management, having somebody that's actually in charge of information protection and having coordination through a working group among all of these departments is really important to be sure that there's not a weakest link in this chain. Third is really risk assessment. This is what we were talking about, figuring out what you're trying to protect, what are the risks to that, and then putting together a plan. Supply chain is immensely important, and that is, it's not just the contracts, but it's due diligence. What kind of security capabilities do your companies that you do business with have? Governments are increasingly looking at their suppliers and how they manage their supply chain for security. I know here in the UK, in Australia, governments are requiring of suppliers that they impose these kind of requirements on their subcontractors and manage their supply chain in a way that that the second-tier suppliers aren't the ones who cause the problem. So there's quite a bit to be done with the supply chain, not just on day one when you sign the contract, but over time in dealing with them, helping them deal with their third parties and things like that. Security and confidentiality management is both IT and physical security. Again, as we mentioned, there are growing standards in this area that companies are starting to implement. The ISO 27001 standard, the NIST standard in the US is growing, the COVID standard. So, and again, I'm seeing in contracts, again here in the UK, for example, some government contracts now require compliance with ISO 27001 if you're going to get a contract. So really these kind of risk management principles writ broad are being writ into the IT systems as well. So a lot to be done on the IT side with managing not just access to your system, but segregating your most confidential information, having need-to-know access by certain people, having access terminated under certain circumstances. So there's a lot to be done there. And physical security remains an issue. The honest truth is, somebody can print out a piece of paper from the computer, carry it out of the office, and you've got a breach. I don't know if you'd call it a cybersecurity breach, but the information on your computers is now outside your company. So physical security remains an important element. These last three categories are really management system approaches, again, that I'm sure you're familiar with in other areas of your company, but training and capacity building, again, training your employees through maybe online e-learning or your own corporate education systems, but training employees, training third parties, insisting that third parties train their employees on how to protect confidential information and what they should be doing. Monitoring and measurement's another good one, and that is, I think sometimes we think, well, if we just put all these things in place, we'll be done. We won't have to do anything from now forever. But again, even the governments are insisting that these processes be reviewed on a regular basis and improved, not just if there's a security problem, but over time, just to be sure that you're staying current with what the problems are, that your technology isn't falling behind. And so ongoing monitoring and measurement, of course, corrective actions responding to problems when they arise, not just reactively, but hopefully you've got a response plan. And again, a lot of the government contracts that are now being written are saying things like, you need to tell us, the government, if you have a security breach. There are increasing numbers of securities, so stock exchange and public securities administrations requiring disclosures of security breaches. So there's things to be done in the corrective action and improvement area as well. Again, we've got lots of information at Create about these 8 categories, but this is really where the practical work is being done that we see. and that we think are the leading practices. I'll quickly show you a couple of things here. We've produced a couple of reports that are available on our website. This is our report on enterprise risk management, and it shows you the kinds of checklists or inventories that you might want to think about for your various kind of intellectual property, but on here particularly is trade secrets, and what is protected. Is it yours? Is it someone else's? Where is it being used in your company? Where is it being used among your supply chain or other third parties? And then, what's the risk for my company? And is this a risk that I need to be managing? So this we think is a fairly useful form. And again, as I was saying about the IT security, we're not an IT security company, but are dealing with a lot of companies who are implementing ISO 27001 and are dealing with the IT side of things. But the important thing is that these systems can't be designed in a vacuum. And even the ISO standard, for example, says in order to be effective, you need to define the objectives of your system. What is it you're trying to protect? This is what I was saying. You need to know what confidential information, what risks you're protecting against as you implement even these kinds of IT systems. So that's really sort of an overview of the kinds of risk management, the kinds of activities. I'm looking here if there's any other questions, Pamela, that have come in here.
I don't think so. I think we can keep going, but please do type in any questions you have in the chat section. Again, as I said at the beginning of the webinar, we are very pleased to be co-hosting this with ABPI. I know ABPI is very interested in this topic as well and has information available. But let me just we just have a few slides to complete, and then we can, of course, answer any questions that you may have. Create, through its work with companies around the world, has developed Create leading practices for intellectual property protection, and will be releasing in early September another service called Create Leading Practices for Trade Secret Protection to address critical business information. Based on our work with companies, we have really come to understand the importance of having a specific focus on this information for those companies that have business critical information that they are attempting to really better understand, better classify, better prioritize, and better secure. But the Create Leading Practices approach is a three-step approach. It's what we call measure and improve. It starts with an online secure self-assessment that you would take on behalf of your company, answering about 50 questions in the 8 different categories that Alan described. And the questions really go to the heart of, what is the business process in your company to address these sets of issues? You get a rating in each of the 8 categories and then an overall rating based on your self-assessment. And as soon as you finish the self-assessment, you receive the rating. So you see how you do within a 5-level maturity framework. We then have conduct an independent evaluation. We have trained experts around the world, including in Portuguese, Spanish, Chinese, Japanese, German, French, and other languages, how to conduct an independent evaluation. It goes to the same 8 process categories, and the independent evaluator then provides a rating from 5 to 1 in each of the 8 categories. And you receive that rating, as well as benchmarking, comparing how your company rates to other companies that have participated in Create Leading Practices. You also receive from us a report, a summary report that outlines our observations and our recommendations in each of the 8 categories, as well as how to prioritize, how to address this issue in the context of what your company has today in place and the gaps that it needs to fill. the report is then a critical tool in helping you improve and mature your business practices in this area. And in addition to the report, you have access to a 200-page guide that we've developed for Create Leading Practices for IP Protection, which gives you specific recommendations, specific steps to take, whether you're a level 2 to level 3 in each of the process categories, or level 4 to level 5. Really, specific steps you need to take to help your company improve or mature in the specific area identified. We also want to be sure that you know about different information that is available on our website. There's a great deal of information on intellectual property generally, but we've done quite a bit of work on trade secrets. In May 2012, we released a report on trade secrets and protecting your supply chain. That really gives a sense of the magnitude of the issue and specific examples of how trade secrets have been misappropriated, and some initial ideas on how you can better protect yourself. In February 2014, we released with PricewaterhouseCoopers a framework for protecting trade secrets and helping companies identify, prioritize, classify their trade secrets. What is important to a company, what is a trade secret to a company is very specific and unique to that company. We do believe that the framework that we have provided is very applicable regardless of what is a company's trade secrets. But it's critically important first to identify those trade secrets, to get the key stakeholders in your company together, and to be able to categorize, group your relevant trade secrets and prioritize them. We have model policies on our website specific to trade secrets, but also more general model policies on IP protection. And in mid-July, we'll be releasing a white paper on trade secrets. We've done some interesting analysis of what courts in countries around the world have determined are reasonable efforts or reasonable measures that companies need to take to secure their trade secrets. We think this is very important as the European Commission is in the final stages of the directive in Europe that we think will be released in 2016. There's legislation in the United States that will, we think, increase the ability of companies to bring trade secret cases at the federal level, not just at the state level. Many different countries are bolstering, increasing the protection for trade secrets. So we think what companies do going forward really needs to be carefully documented, and a company will increasingly need to be able to really verify that information was managed and kept as a trade secret. And finally, just in summary, the importance of thinking about and incorporating cybersecurity, cyber risk as part of a company's overall enterprise risk management, and then really determining what is the most important trade secrets. What are the most important corporate digital assets? Companies now retain so much information. The cost of storing data has become so low that companies now are not differentiating between what information is important and what's not. And so that effort needs to really be undertaken. You really do need to understand what is your most important trade secrets, which ones have the greatest risks, which ones are of most interest to your competitors, which ones may have too much visibility to insiders and need to be better protected. And of course, to manage the risks according to the likelihood and severity that those trade secrets will be of interest to others. And putting in place the kind of framework that we suggest, where you are proactively and in a preventative way securing your trade secrets and your other intellectual property. These are important assets that need to be managed on an ongoing basis. Again, we'd love to hear from you. You can ask questions in the chat section on the screen. We also, again, will make the slides available to you following the webinar. The webinar has been recorded, and so we'll be providing you a link to the webinar. By early next week, the webinar will be posted also on our website. And certainly if our colleagues and friends at ABPI want to post it on their website as well, we'll make that available to them. We are also available by email. My email and Alan's email is on the screen. Also info@create.org is a general email that you can send questions to, which we would be happy to answer any questions that you have. Please do make use of the information on our website. I think the Create PwC report is very informative, has a lot of information there on how to approach this issue, how to think about this issue, as well as other information on our website. With that, again, I want to extend my thanks to Elizabeth and her colleagues at ABPI. We really have appreciated the opportunity to co-host this webinar with them, and we look forward to doing so in the future. And we wish you all a good day and a good week, and thank you very much for joining us today. Thank you. Goodbye.